Hi everybody, this is Barely Human. Today I'm going to talk to you about a great quote that I heard, and it pertains really heavily to my Back to the Future Predicts 9/11 video. The quote went something like this: great artists communicate with each other through time and space. And the reason this is so true is because great artists are tapping into something that is eternal and that is ubiquitous, something that doesn't depend on location. It's everywhere at all times. It's something in the ether that holds the same amount of information that is contained in the entire universe. You have access to that information, and a great artist just seems to have more access than you do. And so great artists communicating with each other through space and time is kind of just another way to say there are people who are good at accessing the infinite wisdom of the universe. And because of that, all the stories that those people tell, they seem to look like each other's stories. They seem to mimic each other. So let's unpack that. What that really means is that we're all telling basically the same stories. And it's a level of clarity that we're trying to achieve, which either determines the artistry of how we do it or the fumbling, goofy, clumsily way that we're doing it. See, if you can have a clear way that you convey this infinite wisdom, then what you're doing basically is compacting it into the smallest digestible packet so that an audience can receive it. You can think of that as condensing a large file into a zip file so that it can be delivered to a computer. It's the same thing with a story that you tell through art. You're packaging gigabytes and gigabytes of information into a small digestible packet so that the audience can receive it. This is what great artists do. It's very simple. Now, those gigabytes and gigabytes of information, they're stories. Humans navigate the universe with stories. So all an artist is doing is taking the principles that form the underlying physical foundations of our universe that govern everything, and they're translating it into a story. And then they're compacting that story, condensing it down into the smallest possible deliverable package without cutting out any information, but still condensing it as small as possible so that it can be unpacked and served to an audience. And this is an art that everybody does. You in your own personal life, I'm sure you've had to tell a story, and I'm sure you've had to condense it. Every story that you've ever told, you've had to do this. Now, just imagine that you developed the ability to condense larger stories, basically to tell larger stories, and to tell them in even smaller and smaller ways. It's an art that you develop. And as you develop this art, in conjunction with learning how to compress the story, is learning how to open yourself up to first hear the story from the universe itself. And these two skills put together is what we're talking about when we say like a great artist, and that all great artists can communicate through time and space because they're all just reading from the same script. They're reading from the same story and telling the same story. Really what we're talking about here are archetypes. So back to the Future Predicts 9/11, what this is an unpacking of archetypes that were packaged up by Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale and delivered in this movie Back to the Future. There's the reason that people love this movie and have loved it for, more than 30 years, because it's a story that talks about the fundamental underlying structure of the universe. And it's not a small story, it's a very big story, meaning it talks about a lot of the underlying structure, like a big chunk of it. And you're able to observe that huge chunk in just an hour and 20 minutes. That's why it's so amazing. Like, it's such an amazing technology, this artistry. It's like, wow, I can absorb like gigabytes and gigabytes, like just millions of gigabytes of data. I can observe them in an hour and 20 minutes. It's like when you plug in a USB drive to transfer data files, and then you plug in a high-speed one. You're like, whoa, it's transferring the data so much faster. Well, imagine if you plugged in a high-speed one that went at like 1,000 times the rate. You as an audience, that's what you're experiencing when you sit down and watch a great artist who has condensed their archetypes down into 1 hour, 1.5 hour snippets, man. You're looking at the fundamental underlying structure of the universe being transmitted to you through a data cable. The data cable is your interaction with the movie screen. This just happens to be the relationship that we've developed, the medium that we've developed so that we can get this data transmission. But first and foremost, it requires the artist to do it. So, that quote really struck me. It stuck with me. And it speaks a little bit to how artists can predict the future with their art. Because they're all reading from the same script and telling the same stories. And in addition, anything that we're acting out in the real world, right? Any actions that we take, plans that we make, all of these originate first and foremost from stories in our heads. A plan that we make is first and foremost a story that we have to make in our head and then form into some plan for taking action. And these stories are no different than the stories that an artist would make up, when they're reading the script of the underlying structures of the universe. So that's why events in real life, whether consciously orchestrated through some nefarious conspiracy or whether they just played out through people's tangential involvement in everyday life, that's why they mimic art. It's all coming from the same script, the same place. So that's my little thought for today. Anyways, I hope everyone is doing amazing out there in the world. And I hope everybody is finding little bits of insight every single day to elevate their consciousness.